Alrighty, we might get it happening. First of all, I'd like to thank all you guys for coming tonight. Appreciate you taking your time out to come here, and hopefully I can give you guys something a little back so you guys can possibly catch a good fish. And might turn that off. And possibly get a lot of Jewfish in your own waterway. And Bushy's coming later. He got his nights mixed up, so obviously old age is getting to him eventually. But he'll be here later and he'll be doing a bit on flathead and brim. If he doesn't turn up by the time I finish this, I might touch on a bit of snapper for you guys as well. So also I'd like to thank Gav for putting it on. He's also going to have a sausage sizzle after I do my first one. So hang around to get that. And as you're going out the door, make sure you grab a raffle ticket because we've got a couple of rods and a combo and a few bags and stuff to give away later on. So hopefully all of you guys will take something away from the night. If you don't get any tips off me and I'm rubbish, so we'll see how we go. Alrighty. So who here's caught a Dewey? Hands up. That's probably one of the better ones. Who's caught one on a lure? Bit less. Who gets one every trip or almost? Yeah, I thought that'd be the case. Alright. So yeah, they definitely are a fish that you can come across, even bycatch when you're chasing flathead, bream, other things. And I'll be honest, that's how I first came across them. And my first ever Jewfish on a lure was out of the Shellhaven River. So I grew up in Kiama and I fished Broughton Creek and Shellhaven pretty much all my youth. So I have fished your own backyard and I do know it reasonably well. So hopefully I can give you a few tips. But I guess the quest is to be able to go out there and literally when your mate rings you, you can go, I'm going to chase Deweys tomorrow. And instead of him on the other end of the phone going, you're a bit of a tosser, you can pretty much say the next day, yeah, I've got 2 or I've got 3 or even 1. So I can tell you now, once you get a few things right, you'll be surprised how quick the results come, and they aren't that hard a fish to catch once you start to get a few of the basics right. So we might just go through a few myths and misconceptions about Deweys. All right, so who's got a favourite moon phase for Dews? Who does catch them occasionally? What is it?
I like the full moon.
All right, is there anyone else? Colin, there's got to be someone else who rates themselves as a bit of a Dewy fisher. No? Not at all. Well, I can tell you now, moon phase means nothing. Every bit that you see there, I've caught a Dewey on. For the last 2 weeks, the 2 weeks prior to this week, I caught a Dewey every night and multiple fish, every single night. And that moon phase is different every night. The reason people have a certain favourite moon phase is because the spot they fish, that might coincide with the time they go fishing all the time. So the reason they say full moon and dark moons, the guys on the beach, that high tide that people like to fish in the gutters, generally falls between 7 and 10 o'clock around that full moon and new moon period. So that's why them moon phases are always spoke about on the beach. Whereas a guy that might fish a certain hole in the Shellhaven River, he might go out at the same time every time he goes because that's the only time he can go, the only time the missus will let him go. And the tide might be right or something else might be the factor that actually makes that moon phase the moon phase that works for that spot. So it's not necessarily the moon phase, it's probably more about the timing of when they're at the spot they prefer. So that's one myth that I can tell you is not true. The other one is you only get Deweys on bait. You certainly do catch a lot of Deweys on bait, but I can tell you now they are a very viable lure target. And once I started using lures, I actually started doubling and tripling my catch compared to bait. There is times when it is really tough that bait will still be the best way to target them, but most of the time, like probably 90% of the time, I can find that plastics or lures will outfish bait. Now I'm going to have a couple more slides from here on in. There's going to be a bit of a common theme. And the first person to tell me the common theme when I get to the end, I'll give a prize to.
They're all holding Jewfish.
Actually, that's probably worth a hat at least. Who said that? Who said that?
During the day, yeah.
Yeah, who said during the day? During the day. And the guy that said holding a Dewey, because yeah, that means that we're catching them. So yeah, no, the common theme there was yes, they're all during the day. So I mean, I do a lot of nighttime fishing, and you do catch a lot of dewies at night, and they are very nocturnal species, but just like humans, we don't only eat at night. We eat in the day as well. So if you get the things right and in the right spot, yeah, you can catch fish like that during the day. And I can tell you now, my 2 biggest jewfish to date have been caught at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was on a Sunday. Boats everywhere, like pretty much fisherman's day, the day that most guys are allowed to go out, a Sunday. So yeah, as I said, the common theme was that they were all caught during the day, and obviously, as another guy pointed out, they're all holding one. And like I said, with the correct techniques and timing, they are a pretty viable daytime target. And I can tell you now, when I started out in the Shellhaven and then the Georges after that, pretty much 90% of my fishing was during the day. It's probably only in the last few years, with the fishing pressure that I get in Sydney around a lot of my spots, I've started going at night. So purely for the fact that no one knows where I am and can't find me. Because during the day, like, it's that many people and they do recognise certain boats on the water, and you can quickly ruin a pretty good spot. So that's another thing, us Dewey guys are pretty secretive. Probably the next biggest factor is tides and getting to know them and learning them. And I pretty much live on things like this and the Willy Weather app on my phone. Before that, I used to get the Tackleworld tide chart, and I'd literally circle the dates and the days or the tide that I knew coincided when I knocked off work or I had time, or the day I was going, I was like, okay, that tide I've got to go on. And that's how I pretty much used to run my way on the tides. But now it's a lot easier with what we've got today with the apps and stuff we've got. You can literally work out wherever you like to fish in the river. You can be pretty much told the delay in the tide and compared to the tide chart. So the reason the tides are so important is the timing of the tide is the most crucial factor in having success on jewfish. It's probably the biggest thing that a lot of people don't get right, and why they don't catch many fish. So in the coastal estuaries and offshore reefs, and probably location is the next biggest factor after tide. I'd definitely hold tide above location. Dewies are probably a little more prolific in your estuary than you'd know about. If you're actually good with a sounder and do a fair bit of sounding around, you'll soon learn there's a lot of dewies in your estuary. So as I said before, tide might be the exact reason why a certain moon phase is preferred by some anglers. Like I said, it's the most likely spot fished, and it's fished around the same time each time, and that moon phase is the moon phase for the correct part of the tide cycle. So it's not actually the moon, it's more the tide cycle. So you'd probably find that spot, if you can actually learn when that tide is that works and then repeat it on different moon phases, you'd probably find you'd catch them on different moon phases as well. So jewfish become most active around the hour coinciding with the tide change. The reason is why. Basically, jewfish are lazy. They're like a Homer Simpson of the waterway. They don't like to travel far to get their food, even though it's quite documented that they can travel extreme distances. Generally, once they have homed in on their estuary, they are pretty localised about how they go about their feeding. So while the tide's running, that'll exert energy, and as the tide slacks, it makes them a lot easier to chase their prey. And on the slacker water, if you actually spend a bit of time on a river, you'll notice when the tide's pumping, the bait will be all holding against the bank tight out of the tide, trying to save its energy. Once that tide starts to slacken, the bait fish will start to move out and move around. And this is when the jewfish will use it to their advantage. But once the bait fish moves out into deeper water, then it can become under attack from the jewfish instead of trying to get right in at your feet where they're sheltering. So how do you maximise that 1 hour? So a tide change is generally over an hour. You get half an hour each side of the change, which is most active. Question is, like, how do I use that 1 hour? So as you move up a river, the tide becomes later. So you can effectively have a tide change at 8 in the morning at the entrance of the Shellhaven, around Comerong or something like that. And then up past the bridge, it's 3 hours later, like up towards Grady's and things like that. So you can effectively move the whole way up the river, fishing that maximum part of the tide, and then go back down the front and start it all over again. So if it was me, I'd probably start at the submarine cable. Like, I know there's dewies there, I've caught them there. I'd probably then hit the hole here on the edge of Comerong, and then I'd probably move up to the punt. And that'd take up a bit of time, and then I'd probably leapfrog up to a spot they call Starlow's Hole, or the mouth of Broughton Creek, where I've caught them before. Then up on the side of Pig Island, then I'd probably hit the bridge, and then I'd make my way up the back, which I'm not going to show you them spots, so you'll have to work that out. So, but they'll give you a hint where you'd probably best target. But that just gives you an idea of how much area you can cover. So once you're up past Pig Island, like I said, once you get up the top of the river there, you can see some spots that you'd hit. Like each bend in the river has got a deep hole. The Jewies will reside in these holes when the tide's running. They'll get down out of the current, but then you'll quite often find once the tide slackens, they'll move up into the shallower margins of the hole. And that's quite often when you get them as bycatch chasing flathead and bream and things like that, because you tend to be fishing shallower water. And every now and then you'll come across a Jewy. It's probably more the case that it's been close to the tide change and you've just happened to come across one. So where to fish? As I said, they like to reside and feed around the deep holes in the river. So each of them deep holes is almost like their little home that they sit in while the tide's running and they shelter in to get out of the current. If a day spent sounding the river should reveal the deeper sections, and as you've seen there with the mapping, that's a Navionics map that's on my phone. You can pretty much shortcut your way to knowing where most of them will sit by finding them deep holes, and then take the time to sound around the deep holes and look. Jewfish are a big target. They will show up very big on your sounder. They'll come up as quite a large arch. So pretty much the only two things in the river that will show up with an arch is a Jewy or a bull shark. So you find the arches, they're going to probably be Jew. So one way, if you don't have a sounder or GPS, like that map I brought up before, most of the outer edges on the sharp bends of the river, especially the Shellhaven, will have the deeper sections. So over years of floods, like the corners get scoured out and it ends up being a deep hole. And if you've only got a kayak with no sounder, or even a boat, a little tinny with no sounder, you can pretty much figure out there should be deeper water there. And once you start fishing it and sinking your lures to the bottom, you'll realise you'll be fishing shallow, then it'll drop a lot deeper, and then you'll have an understanding that's where the deepest section of the river is. So if you are sounding around and you find something like this, that's pretty good. Jewfish are pretty lazy, they've got to eat. And what's in the middle of the screen there is actually, this is a shot from in Botany Bay. That's just all white bait. So you find that, they're not going to be far from it because they can just gorge on that. And you can see underneath here, that's a Jewy, and that's a Jewy there. If you find things like that, you're definitely in the right area. Like, it's a bit like us, we won't stray very far from food. If we're hungry, we're going to be near where the food is. So that's where they're going to be. So pretty much if you find something like that, even if there's Jewies not on it, and you come around the tide change, it might change. You'll start seeing arches, they'll suddenly appear. They've come up out of the deeper water to start feeding on that bait. So bait is a big key factor. You'll quite often find if you do get onto the Jewies, you might start catching them in a certain spot, and then after a few weeks it all changes. The bait might have moved. What you need to do is locate where that bait's moved to in the next few holes, and you'll quite often find the biomass of Jewies will be somewhere not far from that bait. Okay, so you might have a spot in mind. You've found a spot in the river that you reckon they are, and there's plenty of bait. So now you need to assess when the tide change is. So maybe if you're at the bridge, the tide's going to be an hour and a half later, so you need to figure out the tide's at 1 o'clock, but I should be there at about 2, so that's going to put me there half an hour before the change. And then try to approach you and cut the motor well before the spot. This is where an electric motor is like invalid in Jewy fishing. It allows you to be very quiet and to move into your area quietly. If it is a Sunday and like you got guys skiing and boats everywhere, it can put them off a bit, but in saying that, you might not need to be as quiet because there's already ambient noise in the water. If they've been used to it, then it should be fine. But if it's pretty much Shellhaven in winter, I can tell you now, it's dead quiet. You can hear a sparrow fart in the tree half the times up the back of the Shellhaven. So I can tell you now, motor noise will travel a fair way. So try and cut it well short. If you don't have an electric, use a paddle, or if the tide's coming in or the tide's running out, try to go well around your spot and then use the tide to bring you into the area. And then obviously if you go back around to fish again, try and take a wide berth and not run the main motor over the area. So then proceed to thoroughly work the area with your soft plastic. Also take note of bait in the area, like I said before, and try to work your lure close to it. You might be working through an area and you might notice some shags or pelicans and tailor on the top. Try to work your lures close to that, because if the dewies are feeding around that hour, they're going to be pretty close to where that bait is. Also, pelicans and shags are a pretty good indicator of jewfish. Tend to find where I find areas with a lot of jewfish, pelicans and shags are usually in the same area. They're all feeding on the same thing, and it usually means there's a lot of bait there, which in turn brings all the predators in. Again, be patient and observant. The results will follow when all of them factors align. You hit the right spot at the right tide with the right technique, and you'll be surprised the success will come, and it will come more often than you think once you work it out. Okay, what lure? There's about 1,000 lures on Gab's wall in there I walked through before, and I can tell you now, in the probably 80 mil through to about 150 mil size, they'd probably all work at one time or another. Doesn't matter what brand. You can pick any brand you want, any colour. At some stage it probably will work on a dewie. I have my favourite lures, but this is a couple of styles. You can buy them pre-rigged, like the two on the top. They're pretty much ready to go. You can buy like the ones that are already the two-tail fish style, which look a bit like a little tailor or a little potty mullet. You then got your stick bait style ones. And then another lure that is extremely successful is the soft vibes. And I noticed Gab's got a heap of them in there as well. And they are probably one of the most effective lures to come on the market for dewies in the last few years. Pretty much every brand's got one. Pretty much all of them work as well. I've tried them all. They all work. Some do work better than others, but probably one of the easier lures to work too. For someone who's just getting into it, they are pretty foolproof, but be prepared to go through a few too, because they can snag the bottom quite a bit, unlike a plastic, which tends to be a little more snag resistant. All right, technique. There's 3 techniques up there. There are 3 that I use with plastics and vibes. Probably with the soft vibe that I've seen, I only use a single lift. But with the plastics, I use all 3. So what I'll do is I'll cast out, and then I'll let the lure sink all the way to the bottom, and I'll be watching the line the whole time. Because quite often dewies can be pretty high in the column when it's around the tide change feeding. And there's enough to be struck on the way down before you've even jigged it. So keep an eye on that. If you do see something, a flick, or the lure even stops, quite often it'll be sinking and it'll just stop like you think it's got to the bottom. If you are aware it's 30 feet and it's only sunk 10 foot down, quite often it's down the throat of a dewie, and strike straight away and set the hook. Otherwise you'll spit it out. So watch it. Once it has reached the bottom and the line's gone slack with the double flick, it's just a casual flick. You might have seen techniques like whipping and really vigorous for flathead. Quite often find this technique is a big no-no on dewies. The big vigorous flicks, don't know why, it is a massive no-no on dewies. It's just try to keep it more of a casual lift, so it's more, the actual lure isn't shooting up so fast, it's more of a, like that, just a simple double flick. And then when I let it sink back, a lot of guys go bang and drop their rod like that, and it just dumps a heap of slack on the water. Quite often you won't be able to detect if you've got a bite, because all of that slack line there, unless you can really looking at it and you see a little twitch in the line and know, you won't know. So after you've done your double flick, control the drop back. Try and keep a semi-slack bow on the line, and with a really good rod, you actually feel the bite come through in the cork. It'll be like a dunk, and then strike and set the hook. And quite often if the dewey's really aggressive, it'll literally rip the rod down out in your hand, which will end up setting the hook anyway. A lot of guys, they drop it all the way down, a dewie grabs it, starts to swim off, realises something's wrong, and if he doesn't pick it up for the next flick and accidentally set the hook, it gets spat out and you wouldn't even know that a dewey's inhaled it and then realised it's wrong. Single lift is the same as a double fix, same scenario, but it's just a casual single lift like that. And again, control the slack on the way down. Once it touches the bottom again, another single lift. I don't let it sit on the bottom too long, only about a second. Quite often find if there is a little bit of current and it is a snaggy area, you let it sit on the bottom with a plastic, it'll land like that. If you let it sit too long, the current will grab it like that, and then it grabs your braid and it'll pull it into a snag, and you go to lift and you're snagged. If you let it touch down and you pick it up pretty quick, it doesn't get time to snag. Same with the vibes. If you get really in tune with them and only let them just touch down before you pick them back up, the snags will become 75% less, guaranteed. Slow roll, again the same, throw it out, let it sink to the bottom, and then what I'll do is just hold the rod, and I'll hold the rod on an angle to the lure. So instead of holding directly at it, I'll actually cock it sideways. Because you're slow rolling, the line's tight, the actual holding the rod sideways will set the hook for you. So when the fish slams it, it'll load the rod properly. And it actually has to pull against your arm. If it's straight up and down, it's more direct off the reel and it won't set the hook properly. So you simply cast out, let it sink down, hit the bottom, and then I just do a slow, casual roll. Sometimes even when you're halfway back and you know you've probably come up a fair way, you can open the bail arm, let it sink back down, and then start the slow roll again. Some days that technique is pretty good, especially if the Jewies are suspending up. You might be seeing the arches 20 foot down and it's at 40 foot deep or something. Then if you're working on the bottom, like the first two techniques, you're pretty much going under them. So with the slow roll, it'll bring it up into them, and then you can go back down and come back up into them again. That's why it pays to watch your sounder. You might be fishing away and you're going over fish. You need to ascertain where they're sitting and whether you're actually in the right part of the water column for them. All right, the tackle. So I tend to use a braid in the 8 to 12 pound. It should cover most situations. I've caught some very big fish on 8 to 10 pound braid. Most 8 to 10 pound braids on the market break probably at 20, 25 anyway. So it's not actually the breaking strain, it's probably more diameter rating than anything. You can use mono, but I find braid is better, just because purely feel, casting distance, you just get a lot more, you retain a lot more out of knowing what's happening with braid than you do with mono. If fishing offshore or extremely rough terrain, possibly go up to 20 to 30 pound braid where you need to extract the fish out of a pretty nasty home pretty quick. Fluorocarbon leader of 12 to 20 pound, and I use at least a rod length. And I attach it via a uni-to-uni knot, which is pretty simple, or an FG knot. And if you don't know how to time, YouTube, there's about 1,000 videos on there on how to time, and just get a pair of shoelaces or some old rope and just sit there and practice and you'll get it eventually. So quality graphite rod, and they're 6'6" to 7 foot with a rating of about 3 to 5 kilo. Just buy the best quality you can get. It doesn't have to be a $500 rod. It can be a $50 to $60 rod. If it's graphite and of reasonable quality, it's going to do the job for you. Just try and get the best you can afford. You can use fiberglass, but fiberglass lacks a lot of feel and they tend to be quite doughy. With a graphite rod, like I was saying with the braid, you'll actually feel the bite. So for the guys that haven't got the best eyesight and they're straining to see that thin braid or the brightly coloured, have to use brightly coloured braid to even see it, when you start to use a quality graphite rod and control that slack, you'll actually feel it come through your hand and you can strike, set the hook. All right, match the rod with a 2500 to 4000 size reel. Pretty much that outfit there that I'm holding, extremely versatile. I can use that for Jews, I can use it for snapper, I can throw it at bonita, I can throw it at salmon, small kingies, use it for flatties. If you buy a spare spool or it comes with a spare spool, put some lighter braid on it, you can use it for brim, you can use it for redfin, perch, everything. Probably the most versatile outfit you could ever own is an outfit in that 2500 size for a coastal angler. You can use it from freshwater to offshore on small kings and everything. Use it to catch your squid for live bait for guys that chase kingies. So if you buy an outfit for Jewy fishing, you can use it for everything, or odds on, you already got it. So you might already have something that's perfectly suited. You just need to get out there and get into it. And by all means, keep a feed. It's in your right, and get a pick and let them go for our kids. So Jewies are a fish that have copped a bit of a hammering, and I certainly know the Shellhaven cops a pasting for them. So I've seen some pretty horrific netting jobs back in my younger days in the Shellhaven, and I'm pretty sure if you do the right thing that fish like these are commonplace for you guys here. I definitely know guys getting them and getting them right at the moment in the Shellhaven, and I tend to find these cooler months are the better months for them. So it's just a few picks there. That one's Shellhaven there. You can see it's pretty cold. You know, I'm rugged up. I tend to find the cooler months are the best. Less boats, less people on the water, and generally the better class of fish as well. So I mean, and these are all in daylight. I do a lot of nighttime fishing now, but quite a few of these are Stewie Heinsohn. He's only just down south, fishes Churros and a few other spots that you guys have access to. That's the Clyde River right there, pretty well known spot, but produces good fish still. So hopefully you guys got something out of that. Is there any questions? Fire away, anything.
So are the Jewies in the basin affected by the tide just as much as the river?
Okay. With the basin, it's probably one of them other spots that you'd have to experiment. I'd try with the tide change because you'd.
I've never caught one with life. It was in the basin, so I don't.
Yeah, I'd give it a go on the tide change and see, but I tend to find with them systems that are a bit more closed and have less effect that sometimes the middle of the tide actually creates a bit of movement, which then they use that to help them feed. So. Whereas Shellhaven River on a big tide screams. A lot of you know going there, it's running, yeah, it's an absolute torrent. Whereas the basin, that little bit of flow actually sparks them into feeding. Places like Narrabeen Lakes and a few other like Churros and things like that, you tend to find it, yeah, the tide isn't as most crucial factor, and that's when things like moonset and moonrise tend to play roles because then that sparks the bait movement. So. Yeah.
Are you using plastics or lures still?
At night I use plastics and hard bodies and vibes. I tend to find at night vibes are one of the better lures because obviously the vibration. Jewies, as you can see in this picture, have got quite a distinct lateral line which fish use to pick up vibration.
When you say you're using a vibe, right, now say the little echo gear which is like a 5 gram sort of thing, so you go up in a bigger size and then you've got all that massive weight on it, or how do you?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. With the vibes, you can use a small eco gear one. Odds on you hook a good Jewy on good tackle, you're going to blow the trebles apart on it for starters, or you're going to chase it around half the night to land it. I tend to use the ones around 100 mil, around 20 grams. Like there's a Spaniard sniper vibe. You got the Jackal Trans Am 95. There's Samaki ones. Like I said, every brand's got one. That 20 gram, 100 mil size is about right. The predominant bait fish size that the Jewies eat in the estuary tend to be mullet and tailor around that size, so you're trying to emulate something they're going to eat. And 20 grams isn't too heavy. Because all you're doing is a single lift off the bottom, and then when you control that slack, it doesn't plummet back down. It actually sinks like a 45 back down. You're almost swimming the lure back down to the bottom. Yeah, a lot of guys will lift it and let it fall to the bottom, and most vibes on the drop just spiral. They look horrible. Worst looking lure in the world. But if you actually swim them up and then hold the line semi-tight, they swim back down. So 20 grams isn't that heavy, and you find if there is a bit of current and you are fishing a bit of depth, you'll actually get it to touch down on the bottom a lot quicker. Like I said, for guys starting out, the vibe is probably a pretty foolproof way to start. The Jewies love them. They get to the bottom straight away. You know when you've hit the bottom because of the extra weight on the slack line, it's so distinct. And then when you do your lifts, you can feel it vibrate, you know it's working. When it sinks back, you know when it touches the bottom again because of that extra weight, it is pretty distinct through the rod. So yeah, the little eco gear ones work. You quite often find guys catch Jewies bycatch brimming with them. And I've definitely hooked a few on them, but yeah, they turn them little trebles inside out if you try to put any pressure on.
You mentioned about leaving the sounder on.
Yep.
The sounder doesn't have any effect on the fish at all?
There's some old wives' tale that the pinging from a sounder Jewies can pick up, yeah. And there's definitely a lot of, quite often find Jewy fishermen are quite eccentric as well. And I don't know, I haven't noticed any decrease. Back in the day, I was paranoid as and turned it off. If I had a spot that it regularly produced dew. I didn't put it on because I knew where I wanted to cast, where I wanted to fish. These days, but I'll leave it on. I've had fish directly under the boat and dropped straight on their head and caught them, and I wouldn't have known they were there if my sounder was off. I wouldn't have dropped on them.
Species too, like rim or flathead?
I haven't noticed any. If it's like a 1 kilowatt transducer or like something you'd use offshore, maybe there's a lot of power there. But the general transducers you guys use on your tinnies and your kayaks, I mean, we can hear it, and I'm sure the fish can hear it. But a bait fish school moving through the water is actually louder than your transducer. So if you actually recorded the sound of a whitebait school, you'd be surprised how loud it is underwater. All right, any more?
Jig heads.
Jig heads, yep.
Like 20 grams you use?
I normally have it in there. I think I must have cut that slide out. Generally, jig heads, I'll use 7 grams to about 14 grams in water up to about 40 feet. So say I'm fishing water that's probably 15 foot or less, I'll probably use 7 grams or quarter ounce. Once I get above 15 or 20 feet, I might step up to 3/8 or around 9-10 grams and then work up from there. You don't really want to plummet to the bottom. It looks a bit unnatural. So with the plastic, after you do your lift, you want it to kind of sink down slowly and look naturally. Not many bait fish pretty much rocket to the bottom. So with flathead though, it's a different thing. I tend to use a heavier jig head and get it down there. They tend to like when it smashes into the sand and puts a puff up. So try to keep it light. Yeah, you'd be surprised the lighter you can get away with, the more bites you'll get. Yep.
Just on your vibe, you're talking about the vibe, so if you're using plastic, I gather you go with paddle tail sort of stuff on the dusky afternoons.
Yep.
Something with a bit of vibration rather than flick stick, so you're looking for vibration more than side fishing at night time?
My favourite plastic is the squidgy fish in 100 mil. Like I said, you can use whatever you want, but that's got that many runs on the board for me that I've got a box full of them, and then or the vibe. So that's pretty much all I use. I can tell you now, I've thrown that many casts and fished that much for them and tried every plastic under the sun. That one even when it's tough and a bit quiet, that fish profile that pretty much looks like a little potty mullet or a tailor seems to get the bites. Like some days you might find a brighter colour might be better. You never know, the water might be dirty and like a neon sort of colour might work better, but at the moment, the Shellhaven's quite clear. You've had a bit of rain, but it's quite clear. I went and checked it on the way down today. I'd use more of a black or a silvery type colour, more of a natural one. At night though, I tend to use whites. Yeah, I tend to go for like the white vibe or a drop bear coloured squidgy fish. I don't know, it's a confidence thing. Seems to work for me, so. Yep.
What about the hydro wave at night? Are you using that?
I don't use a hydro wave anymore because I don't have a boat, as you'd know. You deliberately asked that, didn't you? Yeah, I do use it at night. I have seen them work. I've sat over a school of dewies and turned it on mullet and watched the dewies literally come up to investigate, obviously, what the sound is. I wouldn't say it was a magic bullet and dewies jumped in the boat, but if anything, they're probably great for masking unnatural sounds and things like that. So, like the guy asked before about a sounder, possibly if the sounder was going to affect them, having a hydro wave that's playing, obviously what a mullet school's meant to sound like will mask that sound and they won't be aware that you're in the area. But generally speaking, if you're fishing at the right time, in the right spot, and they're on the fang, I don't know if it'll make a difference. It's more, they're already on the job. I think it's more for when fish are a bit shut down or not feeding, it might entice a bite. So, yep.
Is there a certain distance you like to not go too far from the hole? You know, look at the bait and then continue to the next hole?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. I guess you work that out over time and time in the water. I mean, you can get pretty locked in your ways. I know I do sometimes, and when I start to struggle to catch fish, that's when I'll literally try to forget everything you know, start again, and that's when you can find fish quite a distance from where you think they should be. So there's a saying, there's no fences. So the fish are where you find them. They can move wherever they want, and if the bait's there, then they could be there. I guess bait does play a big role. Try and look for the bait. You might be 100 metres from where you're going to go, but then there's shags and pelicans working a school of bait, odds on they're probably going to be there. Like, that's where the food is. So I guess all you got to do is get out there, and how I found all my spots back in the day, there was no charting whatsoever for where the river. You couldn't get an avionics chart, it wasn't known. Before we had a sounder, we used a house brick on a rope. That's how we found out what was deeper. And we literally just spent all day casting our arms off, and then over time you started to realise that you'd hook fish in very similar spots or off a certain tree on a bank or a rock, and then I guess later on, once technology came about, or we could afford a sounder, we realised there's a ledge there that they sit behind, or the bait tends to hold in an eddy there. So it's more about getting out there and doing it, and you might find your own little honey hole that every other guy drives past because he hasn't noticed it. So, yeah, any more?
You know, you talked about you don't want to tell us your secret spots up above the bridge, and that's fair enough, but how far up do you reckon they go?
All the way to the fresh.
All the way?
All the way, yeah. If there's food there and you get a fair bit of time with no rain, the salinity up there is a lot higher than you think. So,
Actually being caught up at the pumping station at cooling on.
there you go.
Well, they are.
Doesn't surprise me at all.
And that's above the first low, Dean's low rapid.
Yeah. I mean, I've caught them as far as Grady's.
Okay.
So and I've caught bass in the same rock wall. Same rock wall, caught bass, perch, bream, juice. So, yeah, don't be locked into thinking they're all down the front.
Well, I was,
Yeah. You quite often find with Jews, they do take a migration out to the ocean to spawn.
Yeah.
Then when they come back in the system, which, like I said, I've been catching fish for the last 2 weeks, every night, multiple fish. This time of year is the best time of year for me because I know where they move into. I know the next spot they move into. I know the next. I'm literally following up the river. And at the moment I'm in a tagging program and the tagging guys are onto me. They go, we can see you're moving like in the dates, moving up. I'm following the same biomass of fish up the river, and that's how the bait moves up that system. And I can tell you now the same thing happens here at the Chalet. And the only time a variable gets thrown into that is a flood. Floods will be your variable. A lot of fresh, they can tolerate it, but it'll generally push them down and it pushes all the bait out. So they can't feed. If there's no food there, they're not going to be there. So, no, that was a good question. Yeah?
Halfway yours, please.
Yeah?
Okay, they're working.
That's top secret, mate.
They're working in your rig system up there. We'd all kill to know what you're using, mate, because down here.
How do you know I'm up there? I could be sneaking down here somewhere. You know it's my old stomping ground.
So we know you haven't brought up halfway yours, so is there something that you might point us in the right direction to put us on a different path down here with the lure choice, mate?
And with that, what depths is visible as well, boys.
And what? And the what? The depth. Okay, hard body lure fishing at night is probably a whole nother kettle of fish, to be honest. It's probably the most secretive part of Jewfishing that guys don't talk about. There's a lot of guys around here that do it that you probably wouldn't know about and catch some monstrous fish. Pretty much an orange cannon shot from this shop. So I can tell you now, there's some very big fish around here and in many systems, and there's guys that sneak around in the AM hours that you wouldn't even know about that catch them. The only time that you know they get them is the odd scale that gets left behind it where you know they get caught. So you tend to be this time of year when you've missed it. The mullet run is prime time. When the mullet are running, you find where the mullets stack up at night, and there will be 10 to 40 kilo Jews en masse with the mullet. Like the mullet school you're seeing on top, times that by 3 underneath it. They'll be right there. You might get one first cast, you might get one 100th cast, but that's generally, you got to literally drive the river to accessible land-based spots and look with your own eyes. You'll see the mullet schooled on top. For any guys that are marlin fished or anything like that and seen slimies and yakkers schooling on top in the ocean, it's like that. You don't see it during the day, you wouldn't know it happens. Like I said, you literally, when you're asleep at night is when it all happens. And it can happen in 6 foot of water, 10 foot of water. It can be a massive flat, like the old entrance at Shoalhaven Heads. It could be all up there, up in that bay, and it's just, you wouldn't even know about it. You launch your boat there in the morning to go on the river. you've missed it by a couple of hours. There was monstrous fish there. And the mullet literally jump out on the bank when they're there because they're that scared. You'll know when they're there. The mullet just shower like nothing else. And I'll be honest, pretty much any hard body over 12 centimetres will work. Tend to find the ones with the duller rattles or no rattle are better than the really high frequency rattle. I don't know why. Maybe, I know with that hydro wave it was a bit of a dull sound that they reckon the mullet were. Maybe that's why it works, but pretty much you find, as I said before, find the bait and you will find the fish, and with a hard body you simply cast it out and it's a slow roll. But you will put in a lot of casts. But when it happens, it'll be like that, big. They generally don't get many small fish on them. So you tend to be using something from 13 centimetres to 20 centimetres, and you tend to use a lot heavier tackle. Step up to a 4 or 5,000, 20, 30 pound braid, 50, 60 pound leader. Generally the fish that eat them lures are pretty big and they're pretty nasty too. They know where to go and what to do once they're hooked. So yeah, that is for the guys that are probably very dedicated or want to give it a crack, but it is viable here in your system. So, but probably for most of you, the Sunday is probably the day you're going to get out during the day when you're free, and I'd be more inclined to use the plastics and the vibes. All right, any more questions? Keep firing away, guys. I'm happy to answer anything.
I seen them earlier this year showing up in about 2 foot of water. You reckon they'd be in there too?
One way to find out. I can tell you now, if there's 4 foot just outside it, that's where they're waiting. I mean, 2 foot's not, if it's a big Dewey, it's not much for him, but he doesn't need much more than that.
I found that the Deweys that I've seen, a lot of them, especially during the winter, they're hanging around the blackfish schools, the niggers.
Yeah, well, after the mullet run, you usually get the blackfish run, and a lot of old timers will tell you they use blackfish heads for them, and they definitely do eat blackfish, but I don't keep a lot of Deweys, but back in the day I used to keep a few. I never once found a blackfish in one. I found everything else, silver biddies, then mantis shrimp, slimies, yakkers, brim, everything. Never found a blackfish, but the old timers used to say sometimes they'd be fighting a blackfish and a Dewey would slam it while they're fighting it, yeah. So definitely for a really big fish, yeah, like I said, be a million casts, but once you hooked one, it'd be worth it.
I've been schooled just at the edge of the canal there, just where it branches off in both directions, from a place what we used to call the swirls.
Yeah, you better not say it too loud with Bobby in the room.
Right?
Yeah.
Off the beach with hard bodies and plastics?
Yeah, it definitely can be done. I know there's a couple of guys that actually do it around here. They keep it pretty quiet, but if you get a gutter close enough in, Shoalhaven Heads or the other side of the river there, you can definitely use vibes and plastics, and you can get them during the day. A lot of people think beach fishing's all at night, but them fish that are in that gutter that you catch, a lot of people think they move in. Most of the time they're sheltering in that gutter all day. It's just they'll feed closer to that change. And at night time, obviously, they've got the cover of darkness and can free to move around and chase down what they want to get. But definitely you can use plastics, and vibes pretty much the same way. Find the gutter, work it over, move to the next gutter that's 200 metres up the beach. You tend to find you'll cover more ground, probably get salmon, tailor, bit of bycatch as well, which will be good. But I know up the north coast, up around Taree and further north, they do a hell of a lot of that now during the day. So all you got to do is go out there and give it a go. This time of year is not a bad time of year to do it. I know when I lived down here, the cooler months, we got them at Shoalhaven Heads a bit. So if the gutter's there and there's some tailor and stuff in it, they might be there.
You talked before about the tide, the sort of slack water around the top of the tide or the bottom of the tide. Is either one better, do you think, or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. He's asked whether the top or the bottom, whenever you can go. I get a fair bit of freedom, so I fish all kinds of tides. But yeah, if you can only fish a low, fish the low. If you can fish a high, fish the high. Tend to find probably on the lows you'll find them more where flats drain off into a hole, places like that, and the high tides you'll tend to find them more in the big eddies you get along rock walls and things like that, actual more of a vertical face. I think they just move to them areas on the tops of the tides because the bait gets swept along the wall and then eddies up and gets stuck there. whereas the low, like I said, all the bait's got to come out of somewhere. So either one. I tend to find if you are fishing pretty hard for them and you're fishing the tops and you're doing no good, reverse it. Fish the lows in the same spots and you might find it'll change. Quite often I'll go for a 2-week period fishing highs. That's when I'm getting all my fish. Then I might go a couple of trips where I really struggle and then I'll just reverse the tide and you'll find you'll catch them again. So they are a bit of a funny creature and yeah, they do change their habits pretty quick. So yeah, any more questions? Jim?
I got here a bit late, but you talked about sense at all?
No, I didn't talk about sense. I do put S factor on all my lures. That is a scent that is distributed by the company I work for, but mate, I know there's Dizzy scent out there, there's Mega Strike, there's all kinds of stuff. Even if it doesn't work, if it masks the smell of sunscreen and petrol or CC's chips or barbecue shapes, whatever you like to eat while you're out there, then it's probably a good thing. So definitely, I believe S factor. I mean, Joel, who's standing at the door there, he's probably witnessed the odd time when fish have struck multiple times at a lure and I've missed and then missed again and then hooked it the third time, and I don't know, we believe S factor might have made the difference there, but I'm not a rocket scientist, so I'm not sure, but it seems like it works. I'd use it. If you got it, use it. If you don't have it, try and get some of it. So, all right, anything else?
So fishing the beaches, you'd go to a heavier line, would you?
If I fish the beaches with plastics and vibes and hard bodies, you'd probably step up to like a 4,000 size with 15 pound and maybe 20, 25 litre. It's quite turbulent, so you can get away fishing a bit heavier, but you want the outfit to still be fairly light. It can be quite heavy to use, like a 10-foot rod and a 10,000 size reel, trying to flick plastics. No, just try and keep it light and keep mobile. Only a small backpack, couple of lures and what you need, and keep moving. You'll quite often find like the Jews are only in one gutter if they're actually on the beach, so you won't find them usually spread over 4 gutters. They'll be in one. And you need to find which one they're in and then concentrate on that one. So, alrighty.
Catch many fish with tags in them, Chris?
Me personally, no. We've got a tagging program. There's actually guys that are tagging here in the Shellhaven, Georges River, Lake Nowra as well, Bateman's Bay. We've had quite a few recaptures on the tags. I personally haven't caught one, but I think about 5 or 6 of the fish I've tagged have been recaptured now, and probably the most unique one was recaptured recently when we had the big rains. It was caught at Newcastle Breakwall, and it was originally tagged in Chippy Norton Lakes in the Georges River. So I think it was 160 kilometres or something. The fish had migrated along the coast. So it just goes to show what's happening in the Shellhaven. Like, you could be affecting the basin, you could be affecting Bateman's, or vice versa. So, like I said, they take on that migration to spawn, and they don't always enter the same estuary when they come back. So, prior tagging has documented fish from the Georges going to Sydney Harbour and Hawkesbury to Port Hacking. So, they tend to migrate the coast, so you might find one season you'll get a run of fish that's 60 to 80 centimetres, and then the next season it might be all 90 to over a metre fish, and they might not be the same fish that were there the season before. So I remember the few that were getting caught in the basin a few years ago seemed to be all that 60 to 80 class, and I definitely know before you got that big rain, the fish that were getting caught tend to be metre sized fish. So there was a different class of fish that had obviously moved in there. So, yeah, they are quite a mobile fish. That's why you might find them in one spot one week and then next week they might be 2k up the river. You just need to keep mobile, like I said, maximise that 1 hour of the tide, hit as many spots as you can. Some days you'll get lucky and you'll hit one in every second spot. Yep.
How far offshore have you caught them?
The furthest I've caught them offshore is in depths of, I think it was 100 metres, so 300 foot. Generally, you get a fish in that depth, you got to keep it, and because they barotrauma is pretty bad, and you can put release weights on them, but I think from that depth, it's not going to survive. So they are caught well offshore, definitely up the north coast.
And
they catch them along. Bycatch, yeah, definitely. Yeah, chasing like, I think I was chasing cobia at the time when I got it. Yeah. So that fish there actually is out of quite deep water offshore. That's not in a river. I think that was out of about 70 metres offshore. That was actually targeting them though. I had a feeling they were going to be on that reef, and first bait down was that, and that was his first ever Jewie. So, yeah. Yeah, they are probably the most spread out fish on our coastline from the terrain that they are. Like the guy said, Coolindale pumping station to in 100 metres of water offshore. I know the pros used to smash them pretty heavily on the banks back in the day, so that gives you an idea how far they can move offshore. All right.
Can you target them like 30, like off a reef, about 30 metres or so? Can you target them on a bait school? Can you sort of work out where to go, what fish they're feeding on, whether they're coming from a certain hole around that reef coming up? Does it sort of work the same as the rivers? Or?
No, offshore reef fishing is a whole other different thing. You tend to find it's structure orientated, so it will be deep all around it. You might have a pinnacle or a rise. They'll sit next to the vertical wall on the rise, maybe a cave they might sit in during the day. But I tend to find they're pretty hard to target offshore with lures, just because they can be so clicky about where they sit. They'll be sitting in a radius this big, and if you miss it, you miss it. You tend to find the guys that are pretty prolific at fishing offshore Jews will have their special marks, and I've been lucky enough to fish with a few guys off Sydney that are really good at it, and they might re-anchor half a dozen times just to get on the right spot. The lay of the boat might not be quite right. It might be only 10 metres, and they'll go, no, re-anchor again just to get right over where they know they sit. You tend to find guys that are divers. They usually can shortcut how to fish offshore because they go down and spear them, so they know where they sit every time. They can sort of figure out where they've got to fish above them. So bait fishing is definitely a better option for Jews offshore. Yeah.
Do you chase them on the fly rod as
No,
well?
I've never chased them on the fly rod. Got a few mates who do it. It's pretty specialised, but it definitely could for sure. There's guys that do it, and I tend to probably in the daytime, unless you find areas that are shallow, because you get with tide and stuff. Obviously, you need a really fast sink line to get down, and probably a heavy clouser with big bead eyes or a big profile, big lead eyes. Probably try it at night. When they move at night, they tend to move a bit shallower. If you find them areas where the mullet or the prawns tend to stack up and they move up onto them shallow areas to chase them, it's probably a better area for fly.
Do you ever use any burley or anything like that?
No. Sometimes bait fishing offshore I will, but no, tend to use no burley at all. They're either there or they're not feeding. Also burley, you can tend to attract a lot of other stuff. Some bait fishers will use burley more to attract the bait, then they'll sit there for hours, and after a while the Jewies will home in, obviously on the bait school under the boat, and that tends to work. I know in Sydney a lot of guys have big strobe lights that go in the water, and they'll sit on an area they know the Jewies might have to swim past, and the bait tends to hold up in the light, and then they'll get 15-20 minutes of a bite period of the Jews will come and hunt the bait, and yeah, everyone has their little way of doing it, but yeah, you can burley if you want. I know guys fishing offshore they catch them on floaters like that you fish for reds, yeah. So if you're on the right reef, you can get them chasing reds as well. All right, anything else?
Yeah, I've got one question.
Yeah.
We talk about, so there's a comparison with flathead. You get 45, 50 centimetre flathead, you let it go as a breeder. What do you know about Jewies?
Okay.
Age and breeding?
Yeah, I guess this is a bit of a bugbear for me. You always see big flatties get released, and anyone who tends to kill a big flatty literally gets criminalised if he posts a photo and people see it. And pretty much everyone wants to stick a knife in his back when he's not looking. To be honest, Jewfish and snapper are no different. They're like it's probably in years gone past. Old Rex Hunt was probably a big advocate for breed of flathead being released in a few other profile anglers, and for some reason it still seems okay to neck a 20 kilo Jewie or a 6 kilo red and nothing's thought about it, yet it's probably the same thing. So with Jewfish, they reach their sexual maturity around 70 centimetres, which is usually around 2 to 3 years of age. The old size limit was 45, so it's good that they've changed that now to at least possibly get one spawn out of the juvenile fish. But I don't know, I guess with all the frame donations and things like that that are being done with DPI now, it's quite staggering growth rates difference. You can have a fish that's 130 centimetres, it's only 7 years old, and then have a fish the same size from the same system that's 27 years old. So it's quite amazing that the science that's coming out now, it's showing maybe we don't know as much about growth rates of fish as we once thought. So it seems to be more endemic to the system, how much bait there is, and obviously what type of fish it is. Some fish have exponential growth rate because they're constantly feeding, constantly moving, whereas some not so much because they might be more selective about what they eat, or the diet they have isn't as high protein. So I know I've personally caught a large fish that ended up dying from a prolonged fight, and I thought it was going to be 20 to 30 years old, and it only ended up being 9 years old, and that fish was 30 kilos. So yeah, I mean, anyone else would have guessed it was pretty old. So, but in saying that, they're big Jewies. I try to release every one of them, and same with snapper as well. I mean, probably if you're going to eat a Jewie, I'd say that probably around that 80 centimetre size, maybe to high 80s, 90 is probably your best eating size. Anything above that, it can have worms is one thing, and the flavour does tend to go. Anything under that size, obviously they call them soapies for a reason. They do have a bit of a soapy taste. So yeah, I mean, if you get a real big one, I mean, it's your choice what you want to do with it, but that is a big breeder. It's probably a good idea to try and let it go for the future. All right, any more? Well, if there's no more questions, I don't know how the sausage chisel's going, but